Now we're going to move on to our next keynote from Benjamin from Triton Digital, and he's going to present both the strategy and best practices for the programmatic monetization of online audio. And I know many of you are interested in programmatic opportunities in this channel, so it'd be really interesting to hear from Benjamin on this. So over to you, Benjamin. If you could, wrap it up in 15 minutes, that'd be great. Thanks very much.
Yes, I'll do that. I'll share my screen. All right, do you hear me and do you see my screen?
Yeah, all good.
Perfect. All right, so today I'll be presenting some of the trends we're observing in the programmatic marketplace. The goal here is to give you some ideas of what others may be doing, and I'll be comparing trends between Europe as well as globally. So as a quick reminder, we've been in business for 15 years, and we have clients across the whole world. So the trends I'll be showing is coming from activities in more than 80 countries. So basically what we're seeing here is if we look at the regional revenue, that the US is clearly dominating compared to the other regions, such as Europe, which is second, but like quite smaller compared to the US. But if you remove the US, you can see that Europe has grown quite well year over year. So June 2020 from June 2021. Also, as a note, if you haven't followed previous numbers, June 2020 was back to normal, actually quite positive. So it was no longer hit by COVID-19 advertising impact. So we're comparing, I would say, almost 2 regular months here. And LATAM has actually decreased a bit last year. As you may know, from a health consideration, Latin America took a while before getting back on its feet, but we saw Asia picking up a nice pace there as well. So if we look at the regional growth, so even though the US might be the biggest in the chart, you can see that the growth is positive. Everything is positive, actually, except Vietnam and the Czech Republic, but it's not the fastest growing market. So Canada, Spain, Belgium, Germany are the fastest growing, followed by United Kingdom, as well as Brazil and Portugal. So as you can see here, Europe is actually well positioned in terms of embracing programmatic audio. So that's a good thing. It brings a lot of revenues to the publishers. If you compare the audience growth, so it's a bit similar. Actually, we're seeing a growth across so the previous slides were the revenue growth, and this is the audience growth. So you're seeing that there's a surge of consumption in the US, as well as in Europe. If we remove the US, which is the largest market, you can see that LATAM, as you may have seen on the previous slide, was decreasing in terms of the revenues. However, in terms of audience, it really grew. And Asia also blossomed. So India is one of the key drivers, but we've seen also a lot of the Southeast Asian countries embracing online audio and podcasts. We have different, like a diverse client compositions from broadcasters, whether they're TV or radio broadcasters, as well as podcast networks and others. So the point here is when I'm showing the stats is to understand that it's coming from a diverse group of publishers from known groups like Prisa or NRG or Carnival in Turkey. But we also have in-game application like AudioMob and Zemeho, which are putting audio ads inside games. But we also have music services like Deezer, as well as aggregators like iVoox. So we have a vast array of different type of publishers. So when you look at the revenues per publisher type, you can see that publishers doing streaming, so radio, TV, are the lion's share, or the majority, I would say. The on-demand, these are music services or other services that calling us on-demand. So they're the second biggest, and podcasts are about 10% of all of the revenues globally. If we take a look at Europe, actually, podcasts is actually it's actually even bigger than on demand. So we've seen a tremendous growth in the podcast space and programmatic podcasts driven by activities in the UK, but also France, Germany, and other countries in the UK. As a reminder, when we talk about programmatic, you have a lot of rules that can make sure it's brand safe, both as an advertiser, but as well as a publisher. What I wanted to show here is the type of setup that publishers will make available. So what we're seeing in the last 30 days compared to the previous 30 is that pre-roll has grown a bit. So that could be pre-roll on podcasts as well as streaming, followed by mid-roll that grew just by 5%. But we're seeing a decrease of post-roll positions. So those would only exist in podcasts, though, since you can't put a post-roll ad inside it. Also, we have open exchange. When I talk about the programmatic marketplace, the open marketplace, private marketplace, as well as deals. So when we compare here in the last 30 days versus the previous 30 days, we see that the open marketplace grew. So it's true that a lot of publishers will think that the way to transact, programmatically speaking, is through deals, and that's still the case in most of the time, though we've seen in the last month in June, I don't have that stats, but I know I can share that programmatic became bigger than direct advertising globally across all of the world, including the US. And the open marketplace is the fastest grower, but we're also seeing an increase in private marketplace as well as deals. And in terms of the type of auction, first price auction are clearly the one that is increasing the fastest versus fixed price or second price auction, which are actually decreasing. We're working a lot of DSPs, from top tier DSPs like Google, The Trade Desk, Amazon, as well as specialized DSPs like Adres, but also Dynamic, Hawk, and others, as well as DSPs managed by representing a sales house like the Target Bidders and things like that. So when we compare year over year, the DSP compositions across the globe, we're seeing that the Trade Desk is clearly the one that is driving a lot of the growth in the programmatic audio, followed by Google, Xandr, and then all of the DSPs connected on BitSwitch. And then we're also seeing Central and Tammo that are actually quite good in terms of how much they grew globally. When we looked into the European landscape, we see that Google is the number one. So the Trade Desk has had a huge growth, but is ranked, I would say, fourth. So Google is the number one, followed by Hawk, which is a French DSP, but operating across the globe. And then Xandr and the Trade Desk taking the rest of the space, and Adobe has decreased, as well as MediaMath a bit in year over year. When we looked at where the type of consumptions and the players, so what we're seeing is globally, year over year, anyone consuming audio, whether it's podcast or streaming on iOS, has grown 184%, and on Android, 150%. So a quite positive growth led by Apple. When we looked into the Europe, though, it's actually different. So iOS also grew by 169%. However, we see that Android-based consumption almost grew 3x. I suppose that would be explained by the diversity of the European landscape. So in many countries, actually, Android is far a dominant player versus, let's say, France and the UK, where iOS will be dominant. But it's interesting to see the position that Android is taking in the space. When we looked at the revenues, though, we can still see that most of the revenues will be coming from iOS. So the first pie, I forgot to put the title. So the first pie here, 45-55, this is for globally. And the second pie, this is for Europe. So since you've seen in the previous slide that the UK, Spain, France were dominating the space, it's not surprising that iOS fare well in Europe compared to Android. But I'm pretty sure we'll see a reverse of that trend once we compare it within a year from now, based on what we're seeing in terms of activities. In terms of the revenues, again, we're seeing, sorry, actually, the other slide was last month and the last year. So this is just European. So when we see it here, the year over year in Europe, as well as the last month. So we're seeing that iOS, Android actually picked over in the last 30 days. So that this actually explained the trends I was explaining just a bit before. Sorry about that confusions on the graphs. And in terms of smart speakers globally, so year over year, smart speaker composition decreased by 10%, and in the last 10 days increased by 14%. However, in Europe, we see a surge of smart speaker consumption year over year. In the last 30 days by 12%. So I think a lot of people confined at home in Europe started using smart speakers to consume audio. And then in terms of revenues, we see that even though generally speaking, globally, smart speakers decreased a bit, I would say the US is vastly dominating the market, and also the US was a bit quicker at going back at the office than many countries in Europe. And then we're seeing the growth outside of the US. Actually, if I use the other slide, we'll see without the US. So we see the Netherlands followed by Spain. And then if we stick to Europe, we have Belgium, France, and the UK and Germany that are part of that composition of revenues flowing via smart speakers. And then if you don't want to do all of those strategies by yourselves using an SSP like the Triton SSPs, you can also rely on sales house that are connected to our stack. So you can ask them to recommend the best solution or represent you. So we have everything you need from self-serve tools as well as relying on partners that are connected to our system. So thank you for this. So you have my contact info. So if you want me to share the slide deck, I'm happy to do that. So you have both my mobile phone as well as my email. So the mobile phone is extra +44 based in the UK. Thank you.
Really appreciate that. Really great to hear, and it's such a great insight into programmatic audio, and it's great to hear how we can keep audio inventory in the spotlight in an increasingly competitive landscape.